Welcome back to the Hip Replacement Podcast. I'm Chris Bystriansky, your host. I'm about 10 years out from two hip replacement surgeries. Well, one about more than 10 years and one more than 12 years. And I'm here to share my experiences with you. So thank you very much for being here. And today we're going to talk about metal detectors. And I do not mean the kind where people walk around the beach and look for lost treasure, watches, coins, whatever. I don't mean those. I mean the ones where you're going through a security checkpoint and you have to somehow get through a gate or anything where they are checking for metal or they have some type of security gate. So you have to get through and they're going to check you for metal. So after hip replacement surgery, we have metal in our bodies. So, this presented a huge dilemma for me early on, and now it's no big deal. But I wanted to talk about that because it was such a huge issue for me, a sense of embarrassment, and I didn't want to have issues going through security checkpoints. So I actually avoided doing things for a couple years after surgery where I might have to go through some security points. And then eventually I had to, and I eventually just didn't think anything of it after several times. But let's talk about the security, the metal detectors, or the security gates, or what have you, whatever you want to call them, the security scanners. All right. So there's basically three kinds of metal detectors or security scanners. There's think about going through an airport checkpoint. All right. Three kinds. There's a wand, which is a stick that the TSO, the transportation security officers use on you, and they wave it over some area where they think you might be hiding some metal or something, okay? Then there's the second kind of scanner or something where you actually walk through, and that is also a metal detector. This is not where you're stopping. You just continuously walk through, all right? And then the third type of security point or scanner or what have you is the full body scan. Now think about, you got to raise your arms up and have your feet in a certain place, and then a machine from front and behind goes whoosh, and it takes a quick scan. All right. So that is looking for metal and other non-metal objects on your body. Whereas the first two, the wand and the walk-through metal detector, those are just looking for metal. But the big scanner where you kind of go in this glass enclosed thing and it scans you from front and behind when your hands are over your head, that is looking for metal and non-metal items in on your body. So those are the three types. All right. And think about where they might have these things. All right. Obviously in the airports. All right. But also, they're in government buildings. They're in hospitals I've seen over the years, and amusement parks. I live in the Orlando, Florida area, and in many of the amusement parks, actually in all the amusement parks I've been to, you have to walk through security, and there are the walk-through metal detectors. So, these things are popping up more and more. Schools are talking about having them, and maybe some office buildings. So yeah, they're everywhere. So, and they're just part of life now. Well, before surgery, it just wasn't a big deal. You just kind of walk through, and if something beeped, maybe it was your glasses or the sunglass cases really trigger these things if they're hard and they're made from metal. Or ladies, I've talked to security agents, and the metal in underwire bras, so think about what you're wearing if you're concerned about going through metal detectors. But they're pretty common. And, for a while I had a lot of, I don't want to call it anxiety, but I tried to avoid them because I was really embarrassed about having my hips replaced. And what I was concerned about in the airports was a big ordeal, a lot of questions. In my mind, I was just afraid of, and I knew this wasn't going to happen, but I was really concerned about them making an announcement that, hey, this guy over here in aisle 7 and checkpoint 7 says he has hip replacements and we need more security here to check him out. Now, I know that was totally irrational, all right? But I didn't want that to be going through security. I didn't want that to be a hassle because it had not been a hassle in the past. But I certainly didn't want it to me having metal in my hips for it to be a hassle. So let me just walk you through what I do at airports when I go through these security checkpoints and in other areas too, in these other places. So, in an airport, and obviously you got to go through the security, and really, really strange. When I first started going through the security after my surgeries, and it was some time after, I would be embarrassed and I'd be a little bit scared. So I would try to whisper to the TSO, the transportation security officers, they're part of the TSA. And I would try to whisper, hey, I've had my hips replaced. What do I need to do? And I would go into a longer explanation about how I didn't want the security alarms to go off. And honestly, they didn't care. And it's not that they didn't care that they didn't give me due respect. It was like, it was no big deal to them. So they would simply usher me through and I would have a pat down. Okay. They would, with the back of their hand, do this and do that on my legs and on my back and around my ankles. And when that first started happening, I would get a little self-conscious, because I'm standing there, apparently a big, healthy guy, and other people are going through security and are just kind of looking at me. And I don't know why I got self-conscious. I'm just not that kind of person to begin with, but it bothered me. And that went on for, I'm probably did that 5 or 10 trips. And I've probably been on 50 flights since I've had my hips replaced. All right. 50 flights, 50 times going through security, maybe more. I don't know. Let's just 50 is a good round number. But anyway, at first, I was embarrassed. I didn't want to make a big deal of the hips. I didn't want other people to know, other travelers in the lines know that I had hip replacement. So I was just trying to whisper to the security people and they would just usher me through and then do a pat down. And I'd be standing there feeling like a fool with my arms out and, just not feeling great about the whole process. And then it just started to dawn on me that, this is just part of the security process. It's not that big of a deal. So I started to actually embrace it. I started to actually look forward to the security people having to spend extra time with me. And in my warped mind, it was like, oh, I feel like I'm going to the spa because these security people are going to give me a pat down. All right. And I know a lot of people don't want to be touched by security, and that's fine. That's their choice. And I'll get into that in a second. But I actually like the attention. I started to enjoy the interaction with the TSO person. And I ran into several different types of TSO people. They were someone who was 3 different types. Somebody who was, very talkative and engaging and, involved in a conversation while they were doing their job. And then there was the professional type where they only talked about what they had to do and they were getting through the job. And that was fine too. But then there was this third person who absolutely hated doing it. All right. Who absolutely hated giving the pat downs. And honestly, I kind of enjoyed those the most. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I saw these people standing around before I got there while I was waiting in line. And then when they had to give me the security check, it actually gave them something to do. So I enjoyed putting them to work. That's really strange to say, but I know they work hard. But when I see them standing there and then they're kind of upset or, not as pleasant because they have to go and do something, I don't know. It gave me a little bit of a thrill, I guess. But anyway, I started to embrace it. And, I'm standing there with my arms out a lot of times and people would be walking by and I would just give them a thumbs up. And, I'm just wondering what's going through these other travelers' heads that, what is this guy having a pat down for? And it just didn't bother me after that. And even when I was traveling with my spouse or for work or whatever, and with coworkers, I'd be like, hey, I'm going to go get a pat down. And they're like, okay, see you on the other side. And it wasn't that big of a deal at that point. So I would just walk up to the TSO person. And instead of launching into this big explanation about my hips, I would just say, I've got metal hips. And they would usher me through and I would get a pat down. Okay. And then there was this option of these big machines, the body scanners. And when I would tell the TSO folks that, hey, I've got metal hips, they would say, okay, go through the body scanner. And I would say, no, thanks. I'd rather do the pat down. And even though the scanner would be faster than a pat down, like I said, I kind of enjoyed the pat down. I thought it felt like kind of a massage. So I just liked the attention. So I would always forego the body scanner with the hands up. And plus I didn't really trust them back when they first came out. So I would go get a pat down and it was no big deal. And then, COVID hit, right? The virus. And when I started traveling back after the virus was out, I didn't want anybody touching me. All right. So then I opted to do the body scanner. So the process would be, I would walk up to the TSA person, the TSO, transportation security officer, and say, and I wouldn't even mention my hips anymore. I would just say, I've got metal. And they would say, okay, go to the scanner. So I would just go to the scanner, hands up, and very seldomly would I get any other questions or need to get a scan with a wand or anything, because they would just see where it was, where the issue came up on the image and let me go through, not a problem. Once in a while, they would use the wand following the body scanner, but not too frequently. But more recently, I've gone back to the pat down because I like the attention, I guess. I don't know. But the body scanner is certainly an option. So I don't even mention the hips anymore. When I first got my hips done and I started to travel, I was, hey, officer, I've had my hips replaced. I've got metal. And they would just walk away or go tell me to stand somewhere. They would basically cut me off. And now, it's a very short conversation. It's a very, very short interaction. I walk up. They say, walk through the, they want to keep me moving, right? They want to keep people moving because it's their job just to do security, but also keep the process flow. And I would just stop before I got to the walk-through metal detector and let one of the TSO folks know that I've got metal. And they would say, okay, point me to the scanner. And I say, no, thanks. I'd like a pat down. And they would call out, hey, male pat down. And I would just have to wait a minute or two, sometimes 5. It all depends on how busy the place was. And I would just wait. They would walk me through the scanner without me stopping. That's just the way I would get into the airport, past security. And then they would take me off to the side and do the pat down. It takes 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes. And I've never had an issue with that. The pat downs seem to have gone really well. But the point is that the issues surrounding the security were no longer there for me. At first I was very concerned about being embarrassed, having to tell folks or having people overhear that I had my hips replaced. And now I don't even mention hips. I just say right to the TSO, I've got metal. And it could be for any number of reasons, right? It doesn't have to be hips, they don't ask, I don't tell. Everything seems to work smoothly. They do the pat down and I'm on my way. And it's always been relatively smooth, but I have no anxiety about it now. Whereas when I first started after surgery, the years when I started traveling after surgery, I was a little bit hesitant and had some anxiety about broadcasting to the people around me that I had hip replacement surgery. So that's airports, okay? And there are certainly some other areas that have metal detectors or scanners. And like I mentioned before, the government buildings or hospitals or amusement parks. And honestly, I just walk right through the security gate, the metal detector. And I would say 9 times out of 10, it does not sound an alarm. Okay. So, the things you just walk through is like a little arch or a door frame, and you just walk through and it's supposed to be a metal detector, and usually nothing. And if the alarm does go off, I'll say I've got some metal in my hips, and then they just use the wand, they wand me, and off I go. So it's a fairly smooth process, and I definitely have evolved from where my anxiety was when I first started up until now. Now it's no big deal. I don't even tell people, and honestly, the security folks usually don't even ask. So, it's been a really, really smooth process. So if you're concerned about going through the security, you don't have to really explain. Certainly if they ask, be kind and, be polite, but I would suspect that they're not even going to ask where the metal is or what caused the metal. So like I said, I just tell them I have metal and they do a pat down and I'm on my way. Or I do the body scanner and it's usually never an issue at all. It doesn't pick up anything under the skin. So it would not pick up the metal hips. So going through the security was an issue for me originally, just because in my mind, I was embarrassed about the whole thing. And now it's no big deal. I just walk through and no one really questions it. So, I hope this is helpful. If you have any anxiety about, the metal detectors or the security scanners, it's probably not going to go off. But if it does, it's a very simple explanation. It can be very discreet with, not much of an explanation about, hey, officer, it's in my hips. I've got this, I've got that. You probably don't even have to go into much detail, but of course, answer the officer's questions and be polite, and you should be able to breeze through the security checkpoints. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. And until next time, thank you so much for joining us at the Hip Replacement Podcast. And until next time, I wish you the best recovery possible. Take care.